Yo, what's up, you guys? It's your girl, Tree the LPC, and thank you for tuning into this week's episode of the Self-Aware NFL podcast. I just wanted to take a pause right now and just say thank you for all the support this season. I know that this season has been very, very eye-opening for me because of the types of guests that I've been speaking with this season, and they have been absolutely amazing. And this week's guest will also not disappoint. She is here to share her story of how she helps women navigate through midlife, and she is going to really pour a lot into you guys. So make sure that you guys tune in this week. I have with me Christina Smith. She is a life coach as well as a podcast host and author. She has a podcast and a book by the name of Inviting Shift, and she's going to talk about how we navigate through shift and life changes as they come up. And we're also going to take a deep dive into having hard conversations, because I know a lot of you guys out there struggle with being able to talk through situations that don't necessarily always have a positive outcome. So without further ado, please welcome to the Self-Aware NFL podcast, Christina Smith. Hey, Christina, how you doing today, girl?
I am doing great. How are you doing today? You have such great energy. I love this podcast.
Well, thank you so much. I am doing well. I'm really excited to talk with you and chat with you and learn a little bit more about what you do. And so we can actually go ahead and just get things started off by having you tell the audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. So my 20-year-old self would never imagine doing what I do today, helping other people, because I really grew up in a house where social skills weren't really a way of life or self-awareness. Therapy was something that just crazy people needed. All of those things. Okay. So I couldn't imagine that at 47, I would be something called a life coach. I don't even think I knew what that was at 20. But what I do today is I really help midlife women feel confident, maybe for the first time, or maybe just for the first time since their teens or 20s. And I help them start self-validating so that they can stop depending on external validation, because most of us spend the first half of our lives, many of us spend the first half of our lives really stuck with that external validation. And for me, it was like following the path my mother thought she would have made her happy, right? Going to college, getting the job, the promotion, and the house and the car. And when I had all those things, I checked all those boxes, I was probably more depressed than I had ever been.
Wow.
So my mission is to help women feel really confident in their own inner wisdom and their own knowing of what they could be doing in their life. I don't like the word should. And really fulfilling potential that they don't even know that they have. Because my life is really, really fantastic now. I'm not bragging, but it's been a lot of work. It's been a lot of work to get to a point where the bumps in life don't stop me and I can still keep going through them. And it wasn't always like that for me. So I really believe that confidence is about self-trust, self-validation, and really standing up for ourselves, which is, I think where those hard conversations sometimes come in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that being in touch with yourself and really learning to know yourself, like that can be very hard work to do, because a lot of us don't want to face those parts of ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, shadow work, or, however you look at your deep therapy work. What I didn't understand when I started was that there's gold in there. I thought, I remember the first time going to therapy, And she's like, why don't you want to open up? Why don't you want to talk? And it's like, because I was afraid of this rabbit hole. Like I was going to go down this hole.
Yes.
And what if I don't come back out? Because that's how scary it looked. Like there was so many things I had never dealt with emotionally, because I'm a Gen Xer and we weren't really supposed to have feelings.
Really?
We weren't really supposed to be emotional. There was nothing for us to be angry at. Our parents would let us know if there was something to be upset about.
Lovely.
And there never was. So not feeling our feelings is, one way that we really rob ourselves, and then having to go back to dealing with feelings. And many of my clients come to me, they're like, I don't know how I feel. Mm-hmm. And usually the word that they come up with is stressed. And stress to me means I don't know how I'm feeling, but I don't like it.
That's an interesting definition of stress for sure. And I definitely think that it tracks. Like, a lot of people can't verbalize how they feel because we do it so often in our world. How are you doing? And it's like people, I'm fine. Like no one really goes there. Like I make it a practice to tell people, no, actually I'm having a really shitty day and I'm really not in the mood, but so often we've been taught to be polite and just say, I'm fine and keep pushing. And so we don't really tune into our emotions because a lot of us are afraid of doing that. Like you said, going down that rabbit hole can be really tough work. So
especially, and here's what I want to say about emotions that I think, hopefully will get somebody to start opening up and thinking about this, is that the only reason we have what some people call negative emotions, I call them uncomfortable emotions. Mm-hmm. The only reason why we have these uncomfortable emotions is because no one taught us how to deal with them in a good way.
Yes.
And once we learn how to deal with them in a good way, it becomes much different. I know a lot of women who are afraid of anger, like I'm not supposed to feel angry. Oh, yes, you are, or else you wouldn't. I mean, I'm not trying to validate everybody's anger. Like sometimes there's personal work underneath it.
Absolutely.
But anger is, an indicator going, whoops, something's not right for me right now. And, what is going on in the world, or what am I perceiving that isn't right with me? I mean, that's usually what it is. And for me, underneath anger is usually a lot of grief or sadness or fear or shame.
Yes.
And without looking at those feelings, we don't know. But most of us, when we saw anger, it was aggressive, it was violent. And so we were like, ooh, I don't want to be there. I don't want to do that. But we can have anger without getting aggressive or violent.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that a lot of us steer away from the anger piece because of, like what you said, the stuff that's underneath. I can recall growing up being very angry as a child. And I was angry for so long. I never cried. Like I didn't cry about like just normal stuff. And it wasn't until I got to college that I actually started to shift from just being this angry person all the time to really tapping into what I was feeling. And it was grief, it was hurt, feelings of abandonment, all of those things. And then when they started coming out, the floodgates were open. I think I cried for all 4 of my years in college because I had held it in for so long. But I think sometimes we mask things as anger because we don't want to go deeper.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, good for you for doing it in college. I had my very angry years also in adolescence, but then in my early 30s, I was getting a divorce from my first husband, and I was angry for about 5 years.
Wow.
I was so angry all of the time, to the point, like one day I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I'm so tired of being angry. And that's really when I had to go to therapy, because I was like, I just don't want to. It's a lot of energy to carry around that much anger. And again, I'm not against anger. I just think, at some point we have to choose to move through it so that we can get past it, or else we're going to be one of those old curmudgeon-y people. I don't want to be an angry old person. I want to be one of those loving ones that are always giving out hugs and stuff,
Yeah, absolutely. But it requires that inner work. And another thing that you kind of spoke about when it comes to like addressing things is the confidence piece, because I find that so many women, whether they're midlife or whether they're teenagers or 20s, whatever the case, so many people look for external validation. And that was one of the things that really kind of drew me to you, because I feel like that's something that we don't talk about enough, like how our confidence has to come from someone else telling us that we're worthy, or that we look a certain way, or can achieve a certain thing. Can you speak more about what you see in helping women navigate through going from this need for external validation to learning to validate themselves and be confident in who they are?
Sure. And usually, when they come to me, it's like, oh, I want to learn how to self-validate. It doesn't come to me that way. Usually,
of course not.
It usually comes in a form of, I do all of this for my friend, and she doesn't appreciate it. She doesn't give back or whatever. And it's like, so many of us are so good at caretaking others. And the reason it is for the same reason we were just talking about. I don't have to look at my problems. Tree, your problems are so much easier to deal with than mine are for me, right?
Of course, yeah.
I can deal with your problems, no problem. I can solve them all today. But my own problems, well, that's harder, right? So that's one of the reasons we people please and we caretake, and we are like, we're like bidding for external validation is what we're doing. We're like, please see me and tell me that I'm okay. Tell me that who I am and how I show up is good. And I want everybody else to tell me that. And it's such a shame, because we each have our own unique inner blueprint, right? So if we all were going to show up so that everybody else approved and agreed, we'd all be the same person. Like, we wouldn't be different. We wouldn't be able to have crazy musicians like Pink or Prince or, any of these people who are so unique in their own life, because they could easily be torn down by the external validation that tells them that they're not good. And there's always going to be that, right? So we get into this habit of wanting everybody to like us, which is just a ridiculous thing. And then so we spend a lot of time figuring out how we can make those people happy around us. And we're guessing, because we don't know. We're just like, oh, if I do this, maybe I'll do that. And then we get resentful that we're spending all this energy and those people aren't receiving it in the same way that we're serving it.
Yeah.
Or with that same energy, right? Because everybody's got their own little love language. What I discovered in my 30s was it's so much easier for me to decide what I want and what I need and take care of myself, rather than playing guessing games about what everybody else needs. And if I need something, I can ask. And I hope, and I've told all my friends this, if you need something, please ask. I may not notice, right? I have my own life too. I'm happy to provide you with whatever I can. And it's so much easier for me when somebody can ask me for exactly what they want. So that I know, because I've had friends who get really ill and go to the hospital and they want me to come visit. And I've had friends who get ill and go to the hospital and don't want me to come visit, right? Just because it's their own preference and what's comfortable for them. And so if I were constantly to guess that and try to please them or get their external validation, I can't always do that. But I can always self-validate myself, which is, I think people think it's so much harder than it really needs to be. And it really isn't. I take all my clients through this process, and I do it myself every year, where, Tree, you've done a vision board or two maybe in your life.
Possibly.
Maybe 10, 20. Most of us have, right? And what I love about the vision board is it keeps what we want like in top of mind, which is awesome, because a lot of Gen X people don't even know what they want, let alone create a vision board around it, right? Because we never really asked. We were just kind of told what to do. Many of us, not all of us. But so we do these vision boards, but I think we're missing the most important information when we do that is, why do we want what we want? And people don't think about that. They're like, oh, I want the big house because, I need a big house. I'd love that. That'd just be a dream. But why is it a dream? Because human beings, we are motivated by feeling. And so if I put a big house on my vision board, it's there because it represents feelings for me. That when I have that house, I'm going to feel a certain way. Right. And for everybody, it's different. For some of us, it might be safety, security. For other people, it might be freedom. Another person might say it's for connection. I want the big house so lots of people can come over and I can connect. So we all have our own unique blueprint as to why it is that we want what we want. Even if there's a happy family on there or a trip to Hawaii, like we're seeing that and we're going, that's the way I want to feel. So if we can look at how we want to feel, that's how we want to show up every day. And let me just backtrack. So I did this whole thing where I checked all the boxes. My mom was like, oh, you'll be happy when. And I got to my 30s and I'm like, oh, checked all the boxes. And I'm miserable. I'm crying on the way to work every day. For a year, I cried on the way to work. And I was shaming myself, saying, you should be grateful, Christina. What's wrong with you? Your life is better now than it ever was, right? You're living above where you grew up, basically. And, everything's fine. You have a great husband. Like, what's wrong with me is where I got to, because I couldn't be grateful. All the people telling me I should just feel grateful. And I couldn't get there. In fact, it felt even more shaming that I couldn't be grateful. And so I was like, wow, there's something, I need something. Well, I had sacrificed for 15 years, worked 2 jobs full time. I worked and went to school full time. I sacrificed to check off all those boxes that I didn't bring happy with me. So how I thought that I was just going to wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm happy now. Yeah. Was going to be like a whole thing. So the whole idea behind finding these feelings behind your vision board is that's how you start living your life. So for example, my intentional words this year are bold, open, and love. So if I want to feel bold, open, and love when I get to that goal, I'm going to have to be bold, open, and loving now. So bringing in those feelings now and the way that we self-validate. So here's where we came back full circle, right? The way that we self-validate with these intentions is that, like last year, I ran this big summit for midlife women, and a few things didn't go exactly as planned, as can happen with big events, right? And a decade ago, that would have broke me. I mean, I have a great example of a time where I planned this whole thing and one thing went wrong, and I was like, the whole thing was a disaster. But last year it didn't, because after it was done, I looked back and I said, did I show up the way that I want to? Did I show up bold? Did I show up open? And did I show up with love? Because if I did, that's all I control, right? I don't control other people. I don't control acts of God. I can't do anything about that. But if I showed up with my intentions and I felt good about the way that I showed up with my intentions, I can say to myself, great freaking job, Christina. You did awesome. It doesn't matter how it turned out, even if it's like a dumpster fire. I showed up the way that I could. I did what I could do. And that, then I have to let go of the rest of it. And I think too many of us are judging ourselves on the outcomes. And this leads into hard conversations too, right? Because many of us are like, oh, I'm going to go have clients like this all the time and go have this hard conversation with this person. And I'm going to find the exact right things to say. And then we're going to have, reconciliation or whatever. We're going to get past this conflict. And they have the conversation. They go, well, they didn't change anything, right? It's not about them. It's just about you being able to speak up for yourself. We don't always get that outcome that we want. But if I can say that I showed up to that conversation with my intentions in mind, that I was focused on that, then I can feel good about my part. Yeah, I might be sad that maybe I lost a friend or whatever, a relationship, or it's still not in a good place. But I did the best I could, right? I did everything out of my heart, rather than most of the time what happens is we get really distracted by all the other things, like, oh, well, maybe I should have said something a little better than that, or maybe I shouldn't have brought that up, and we get like stuck in all these details, or how are they going to respond? That's the big one that we like to focus on. Like, how are they going to, what if they say this, or what if they say that? None of that really matters as long as we're showing up the way that we want to.
So, I mean, there's a lot that you said, as it relates to kind of, one, setting your intentions, focusing on your feelings, and then being able to make sure that you show up for yourself and that you do it in a way that feels good for you. It was something you said earlier around like really focusing on the why behind, what feeling is there, because sometimes people want the big house because, again, the external validation that comes with it. Sometimes people want to travel because they want people to look at them and see, oh, they have it together. And so I think it is important to kind of check your why behind what you do and really tap into that. Because if you're still doing it for the wrong reasons, you're not going to enjoy it. You're just going to have a really astronomical mortgage and be in a house where you're still miserable. So I think it definitely is still important to make sure that people are doing what they desire and not doing it because of how they feel like someone will react to them, because that is something that drives a lot of people into debt and depression and all of those things that come along with it, because they're trying to, as we say, keep up with the Joneses. And that's not even their heart's desire. It's just about the image or appearance of something.
The mask that we wear, right? I mean, that's what it comes down to. Am I doing this thing for the mask that I put on when I go see other people? I present myself to other people, and sometimes masks are necessary. We can't show up as our, we show up differently at home than we might at work or different areas, right? So the mask isn't always bad. But yes, I love that you made this point, because I grew up really poor. And then in my 20s, I lived on my own. I could afford my own things. And what I learned was that even though I always craved those things because all the other kids had nice clothes and all that, when I could buy them for myself, they made me happy for about 5 minutes. And then it was like, and then it passed. And then I was like, oh my God, this is like, consumerism is almost like a disease. Like, it's like, you just have to keep doing it in order to get the dopamine fix, because anything that you buy isn't the thing that's going to make you happy forever.
Right.
And so for me, it was really learning that I really don't want a giant house. I don't want to have to maintain that. That does not seem like joy or openness or love to me. Like having to hire somebody or clean all those rooms, like that sounds crazy to me. I would rather have bigger space outside and a really tiny home. That would actually make me happier, which was like a big realization for me, because I always thought I was supposed to be that successful person. The successful person has the big house. They have the fancy cars. They're constantly buying brand new cars, right? They have the fancy devices. And I really don't want to participate in most of that. But finding what really fits for me, right? But that's why I was 35 and crying on the way to work for a year. I had a great job. I worked for a great company. There was no reason for me to be crying, except that inner voice within me was saying, this doesn't feel right. We need to do something different. This is actually not aligned with who you are. And that became this huge discovery of discovering that who I am was somebody I really would have judged 20 years ago, because that's what I was taught. Like, being sensitive was a bad thing when I was a kid. I am a sensitive person. I own that. It's my superpower. But that's something I've only discovered in the last 10 years. That's one of those things I was scared of looking at that we were talking about earlier, like sensitivity. Oh, I don't want to be a sensitive person. I was raised to be a warrior and strong, put your big girl pants on. And people praise me for the fact that I can, like Taylor Swift, I can do it with a broken heart, right? Like I can just moving forward and and not worry about my emotions. But the truth is, I am a sensitive person. And today, that's one of my superpowers as a coach, is being able to not only know how I'm feeling, but being able to see it on my clients' faces when they're feeling a certain way and be able to relate with that. So I think, I don't know where we started there, but I think that there's, a lot of beauty that comes out of the work that we do. If we stay with it long enough, there's so much gold down in that icky parts that we don't want to deal with.
Yeah, we definitely have to dig, and we definitely have to kind of dive deep into those parts of us that we don't want to tap into, because it's easier for it to stay in the shadows versus bringing it to the light. But I do want to kind of shift gears. I know we've talked about, different things, hard conversations. We've explored a little bit of confidence, but I want to kind of get a little bit further into Christina. I want to know how you personally connect with the idea of being self-aware and fucked up.
Ugh. Yeah, well, it's funny because, again, I said before, it's so much easier dealing with other people's stuff, right? That's what we love to. One of the ways that I am still fucked up is that I have a lot of passive aggressiveness in me. It's like a second language my parents taught me when I was growing up, and I am fluent in passive aggressive. So I can constantly butt up against my husband. I'll go in his office, I'll say something, then I'll walk out, and then I'll walk back in, and I go, I guess I could have just asked you a question instead of saying it like that. So there's still ways in which my childhood and the way that I was raised comes up. I'm really lucky because I have a spouse who was raised completely differently. He felt loved and saved his entire life, when he was growing up. So I see it so much more prominently because he doesn't appreciate the passive aggressiveness or some of the other nitpicky things that I can do, the nagging, just being hypercritical. I can still be very hypercritical because there's a part of my brain that still can't let go of the fact that being hypercritical isn't always good. Yeah. It wants to believe that being able to see all the details and what could be better and all that being really critical is a skill, which it can be, but it overuses it still. So really, my judgmental self, I know that judgment is about me and my stories and what I believe about that. And yet I still am constantly trying to check my judgment, because it's just the way that I was raised. My mother was the type that everybody is living in the world pissed me off. And so that's a whole perspective, right? It's a whole different perspective than the person that I am today. But I really had to open up and be like, well, why are other people doing the things that they do? And that's really where I think I started my life coaching 20 years ago, is that since my teens, I've always thought about I wonder what makes that person think that way. And I wonder what makes that person think that way, even though they're looking at the same data. But yeah, so a lot of those old behaviors still come up. Not trusting people is a big one. I'm aware that one of the big ways that I protected myself as a child was put walls up around me. And I can still find myself doing that, even though I don't want to. I want to be in connection with people. But my defaults, all of our defaults can come back at any time that we're in that wounded child space. I know some people say we get into a victim space, but I don't like to call it the victim. I think it's just our wounded child that's coming out and acting up. And when we can learn to, I guess when those things come up for me, what I think is okay, Christina, how have I mothered myself in a good way today? How have I been compassionate or kind with myself? And usually that's the problem, is that if I don't feel like doing something, instead of calling myself lazy or a lazy bitch, that's the term I used to call myself a lot.
Wow.
I can be compassionate, and I can be like, so what's going on today, Christina, that we don't really feel like doing this thing that we wanted to do yesterday? What's happening? And I can be kind and compassionate and go, yeah, I know it's hard, and we're going to try to do it anyway. So I mean, I still see a lot of things that I teach hard conversations. I can still put my foot in my mouth and say stupid things that hurt people's feelings. That's all still true. I mean, I think people think that when you are self-aware, you're magically like transformed into this person that would never do anything wrong. We can think that we're doing all the right things, and somebody else can look at our actions and tell us that we're being selfish, or tell us whatever their judgment is. So it comes back to that self-validation of, what was my intention, and did I show up that way?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely appreciate you going there and allowing yourself to kind of tap into the things that aren't really easy, like, to admit to ourselves, and let alone, and, listeners that may also be experiencing that, but aren't really able to acknowledge it within themselves. So I do appreciate your honesty and your authenticity as it relates to just kind of allowing yourself to be vulnerable, and so that other people can be helped as a result of that. So thank you so much for that.
Of course. And I mean, I love Maya Angelou, and I love the quote that she has that, like, when you know better, you do better. Not always.
Yeah, for sure.
It takes us a while before we can actually change the action and the choices to match what we actually want. And so, that's always going to come up. And I don't want people out there thinking that they're a failure if they're like, oh, I tried to give up my passive aggressiveness, and oh my God, I had one comment come out. Like, that doesn't mean that you're not transforming. It just means that we're not like a light switch. You can't just decide that I'm no longer going to have walls when I talk to people. Okay, there's going to be some unsafe people that you're going to need walls with, And so self-growth isn't about perfection. It's about witnessing it, at least, and holding yourself accountable. I am accountable when I'm passive aggressive. I apologize. I own that it's me, and that, it's my wounds, and it's not really about them. Right. So I think that's really what we want from each other, is a little bit of accountability and looking at our own honest truth.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the honest truth is that we are all flawed. We are all in need of, compassion, and we all need to give ourselves grace. I embody the parts of me that are great and everybody love. And I embody the parts of me that really can be very moody and can be very much not really to deal with people. So I definitely appreciate that, you are so open and you were willing to share your time and your space and energy with me today, and being able to enlighten the audience. So I want you to take a moment just to kind of tell the audience, how can they connect with you if they want to book your services, if they want to listen to your podcast or purchase your book?
Yeah, awesome. So you can definitely go to my coaching website if you want to know more about coaching, or if you want to just have a call with me. It's Christina-Smith.com. I also have a free toolkit on there. It's a midlife confidence toolkit. And even if you aren't in midlife, these tools are going to help you start self-validating, just like we were talking about earlier with our intentions. It's going to walk you through a lot of that. So then there's exercises and videos. I mean, it makes it so super simple for you just to start on this journey of confidence. So that's at Christina-Smith.com/toolkit. And if you want to listen to the podcast, it's at inviting-shift.com, as is the book.
For you guys who are listening, all of Christina's information will be in the description of this episode. Please make sure that you connect with her, book her services, listen to her podcast, and all of these things. Also, make sure that you guys follow me, Tree the LPC, on all social media platforms under the handle Tree the LPC. Until next time, be safe, be well, and make sure that you take care of your mental health.